Well, obviously, I loved it. It was sweet and like it melted in my mouth.
Basically, if I'm going to dinner, I would either choose sushi.
So I was pretty curious, and I love sushi since the moment I had the first bite.
My name is Sergio Muñoz with Intelatin, LLC. I was sent the new Nobu documentary.
Oh my God. Who comes up with an idea like this?
Nobu created his own world.
And I thought that it would be a unique idea to interview all my Mexican friends and Mexican chefs, Latin American chefs, about their opinions on sushi. So I asked them 4 questions. Where were you born?
I was born in Veracruz, Mexico.
I was born in Mexico City, the greatest city in the world.
I was born in Nicaragua.
I was born in San Diego, California.
So I was born in Mexico City, in the central part of Mexico City near downtown.
I was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in Georgia.
When was the first time that you had sushi?
Yes, I know exactly when I was first exposed to sushi. It was about, I think, 25 years ago. I came to San Francisco because I went to school at American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. And I ordered sushi. And people were going, hey, we're going out for sushi. I'd never heard of this, going out for sushi. And there was a Japanese restaurant. I had like a California roll, the typical things. And I remember I was just, thinking this is so fresh. And I remember as I'd have it, it's like I had amaibi, which is the sweet shrimp. And they had they take and fry the head, and it was incredible. And I had ikura with quail egg and all these different things. And I loved it all. It was like, to me, and I was hooked. I was like, this is great. So sushi was a big part of my life, that it was a celebration, but it was just also the simplicity of it. I enjoyed sushi, and I'm now a fan of sushi.
My first experience with sushi was in Mexico City. I should have been around 21 years old. Back then, in that previous life, I was a Spanish teacher for a school of languages, and one of my students was a businessman who wanted to speak my language. So I taught him up for about 6 months. Early in the morning at 7, and then late at night every day until he sort of managed the language. And when his course was over, he invited us, the rest of the teachers and the director, to this Japanese restaurant in the Pink Zone in Zona Rosa in Mexico. And that was not very fun for me. I do not eat fish. So the experience, just trying to be polite and not being disrespectful, every bite of sushi had to go down with a sip of sake. So that was my first introduction to sushi.
1988, I was 18 years old. I went to my first year of college in New York. And then, as soon as I got out of college, ended up graduating from a small school in Memphis, Tennessee. Grew up in Georgia. If you had fish, it was typically fried, or it was shrimp, boiled. Not, that was right when sort of the sushi boom was starting in the United States. It really wasn't on my radar. We spent a lot of time at the coast when I was growing up. So you understood the difference between, very fresh fish and fish that, it's got some age on it. That's, not what you want to be eating. So that was instilled in me, at an early age. But, really until I moved to Europe, essentially lived in Berlin, is when I first started to really understand and get into, just the absolute subtleness and discipline, involved in, Japanese food.
My first time having sushi, I want to say it was in my early 20s. Well, I was a young, curious cook, always looking for adventurous places and things. And I believe I landed in Little Tokyo somehow in LA. I mean, just, trying new cuisine. Well, obviously I loved it. It was sweet and like it melted in my mouth, and it was clean. Yeah, and I loved it. It was great. It was like candy.
I think it was somewhere between age 16 and 19. I don't remember if it was in Guadalajara. My brother Andy was working in Guadalajara, and we went somewhere that he wanted me to try this wonderful sushi place. It was either that or it was just off campus. I had the good fortune of coming to the US to go to college, and just off campus there was a little underground, and it truly was underground in the basement sushi bar. The aroma, and I don't say the smell, because to me it was almost floral. It was that beautiful combination of, and I didn't know what it was, but that combination of the fish and the seaweed and the soy sauce and a couple of other things in the room. But it was very, like, it was very pleasant and very subtle, like so many Japanese things.
The very first time, I'm guessing, I was pretty old. I was probably 16 years old. I remember, I want to say it was in Detroit, Michigan, because I was there when I was 16 and I was experiencing foods that I never had before. And I think I always been a foodie, so I was pretty curious, and I love sushi since the moment I had the first bite.
How often on a monthly basis do you enjoy sushi?
You know, between my family and I, we go to sushi probably 5 times a month. You know, maybe once a week. It tends to go in patterns. Instead of once a week, like every Thursday, it'll be like, wow, that was really good on Monday, and then we go back on Wednesday, and then we, go back on Thursday. So it'll be, 3 or 4 times really close together, because you just get all fired up about it, and then, life gets in the way, and you forget about it and come back to it. But from my youngest children to my wife, we all very much enjoyed the experience.
That's a hard question to ask to answer honestly, because I don't have a rhyme or rhythm or a routine for my diet. It's just when I'm in the mood. I don't think on a monthly basis I do. Well, okay, how about we say in the last 6 months? Because I'll tell you why. There's two answers to that, two-part answer. One part is that I have been adhering to an Ayurvedic diet in the last 6 months. And Ayurveda is, it's against sushi and anything cold, because it's an Eastern holistic practice. So anything cold is not looked upon as something good for your digestion. So that's the number one reason that I stay away from it, especially because I have a high pitta or high fire dosha body composition. So it inflames my body. Okay, that's part one. The other part is that if that was not the case, I would probably have it every other week.
When I was a young adult, I would say in my 30s, 40s, it was a twice a month kind of thing, once, twice a month. Now it's a lot less. I just don't go out as much anymore. But I'll have sushi every once in a while, maybe, once every 2-3 months.
A couple times only. And the reason is because I don't dine out very much, because I'm pretty conscious about sourcing, and we make pretty good sushi at home. My 18-year-old son, Sebastian, when he was 16, he actually worked at the best sushi place we have in San Diego. And I think I learned how to make sushi pretty early in my career.
I'd say fairly often, like once a week. I would, basically, if I'm going to dinner, I would either choose sushi, and then now I might choose ramen and Mexican food. And so normally it's a combination of different things, but I like sushi probably the most, because it's also, it's the varied menu. Like there's a place I go to in Encino, they have sushi and ramen.
Traditional sushi, I never eat it. I do not eat fish. However, I can make a vegan version of sushi. I really like miosa, like they're like little quesadillas, and they're, stuffed with cabbage and mushrooms and vegetables. I love those. But I think that also one of the other parts of the Japanese cuisine is I love teppanyaki. And I love just the show. I love the connection with the chef, how entertaining they are. And I don't know, it's sometimes it reminds me of taqueros, people who are serving tacos and they're just cutting the pastor, and then they just catch the piece of pineapple with one hand. I think that is amazing, and I absolutely love that. It's just like the more fancy version, but I certainly enjoy many things except sushi, only if it's vegan.
And have you ever heard of Nobu, or have you ever had an experience at one of Nobu's restaurants?
I used to live right around the corner from Matsuhisa, which was the original. It was the original Nobu, if you will, and what inspired his wonderful empire. Yeah, it's one of the most delicious things in the world. That was when I told you that in my younger adult years going quite often. That was my neighborhood sushi bar. So I had the good fortune of going there often. I had the wonderful fortune of going to Japan when my son was about 12, I think. He was 10, 11 or 12. And the deal was we would go to Japan if he planned the trip. And so we bought a couple books on Japan and he did a lot of the planning. And the rule was that for every robot toy kind of thing he wanted to do, we had to throw in something cultural, but things like sumo wrestling or all kinds of things like fell into the cultural. So it was a magnificent experience. I'll going back to your question earlier of have I been to Nobu? And I said, yes, Matsuhisa. Before we went, I had gone to Matsuhisa with my son for dinner and I ran into Nobu and I told him that I was going to Tokyo and that did he have anybody in Tokyo that could take us to the Tsukiji market, which is no longer around, but to take us to the market and to see specifically the tuna auction. And wouldn't you know, he was so gracious. He put us in touch with his worldwide buyer who picked us up in our hotel, I don't know, 3 or 4 in the morning. We raced through the streets of Tokyo and made it to the Tsukiji market in time to see the auction and then have great seats for a little tiny, minuscule sushi bar right on the edge of the market to have breakfast. It was a phenomenal, phenomenal experience. Just beautiful. And then, of course, going through the aisles of the market, and you come up, against these hundreds and hundreds of examples of seafood that we've never seen here before. They have such a deep culture with the ocean.
I actually, probably the first time I went to Nobu when they first opened in New York, like many, many years ago. And I was very excited to be in New York, but I was most excited to eat at Nobu, which back in the day was really, really hard to get a reservation. So I don't remember the year, but it was long ago. And then when he opened Nobu next door, I was probably one of the first guests there. I flew to New York just to eat there.
Yes, I've heard of Nobu, and I've eaten Nobu. Nobu, I think a couple. Have I been to Nobu in Mexico?
I mean, we have a Nobu in Los Cabos.
Yeah, and I think I've been there. Nobu in Los Cabos.
Okay, so the answer is that yes, I'm definitely familiar with them. Back in the day when I was in the Mexican Foreign Service, we all wanted to entertain people who were coming here for official business, and Matsuhisa was one of the places to go. We enjoyed the ambience, the food. People certainly felt like pampered and that treated nicely because of the chef. So I stopped going because I stopped eating meat. But now it reminds me that it was good and that I want to try it again. And I will definitely go to Nobu in Orange County.
Yeah, so my first experience having Nobu's cooking was in my early 20s. I went to his restaurant it was called Matsuhisa on La Cienega. It was incredible. I loved the experience, and anytime that I could go back, I did. And then I just sort of forgot about it, and then it became kind of blown out of proportion the way it is. Like there's Nobu restaurants everywhere. I went there last year. Well, because I was in Vegas, so I went to Nobu in Vegas.
When Nobu Mexico City, the first one opened, Pablo Ferrer from Sargasso is a dear friend. He invited me to the ingredient showcase or tasting with Nobu when we laid out all the Mexican seafood for him. And so I helped with that, answered some questions about fish and fishermen and sustainability. And so, we're standing in this basically conference room with all these tables full of seafood, and all of a sudden like Nobu pulls out a knife and just starts whacking into like tuna, and he's like just cutting stuff and handing stuff to people, and it was unreal. So I had that experience with him. I was there for some of the opening events, so I was able to meet him again. And then a really interesting part of when I worked as a private chef for an entertainer in LA, about once a week, I would be requested to, acquire Matsuhisu food. And so they knew me very well. And, I'd have a, $3,500 order, and I would just, but back then it was blackberries, right? So I'd blackberry somebody, and all of a sudden I'd go pick it up, and there's this like pallet of food that's going to the house, and then I would take it out and I'd put it on the plate and be very respectful, and so it's not just in to-go containers. And so, and when my wife and I are in LA, we always, without a fail, go to Matsuhisu for lunch. We just love being there. It's just, it's all the wonderfulness of what Nobu and his empire does without the flash. And it's just an unbelievable spot.